Hello, I'm Matt Donnelly, aka the Caffeinated Canuck, and it's time once again for the Friday Night Hype Show here on Fantasy Points. And you know what? We are all about winning. We're all about scoring more, and we're everything that our Arthur Smith is not. So let's get into this week's talking. Let's go, let's go, let's go. But before we get into the games that I want to talk about, the games that I'm hyped to talk about, let's talk about some of these injuries here first from last week, starting with James Conner there, tweaking that ankle against the Las Vegas Raiders. You could say he popped it, kind of like the Raiders fans prematurely popped their champagne bottles. But hey, it looks like James Conner, he's going to be ready to go this week. Trey Lance out for the season with that ankle fracture. If you're looking for a silver lining in all this thing, at least it's not that compound fracture that we saw Dak Prescott a couple seasons ago. Jerry Jeudy, they're saying it's a chest. They're saying it's a sternum type injury. I'm calling food poisoning now because I'm pretty confident that Russell Wilson is serving up that NyQuil chicken kind of casserole that we see going on here on Twitter. Also, Dalton Schultz, knee injury, very similar to what Ezekiel Elliott had last season, a little bit of that PCL. Game time decision there on Monday Night Football. Hey, I'm pivoting to another position here, another player at tight end here if I can for my fantasy rosters. Justin Herbert, rib injury. Hey, you've got to do whatever you got to do to keep these Los Angeles Chargers trainers away from Justin Herbert leading up to the game. We don't want another Tyrod Taylor type incident here. Now, talking about some of these games here right off the get-go. Hey, we just finished watching the Chubb versus Harris Thursday Night Football, Steelers versus the Browns game. But here's some of these other games here going on this week. We've got the New Orleans Saints heading to Carolina where they're 3.5-point favorites. Now, do the Saints have cat scratch fever? Can you get rabies from cats? You know what? I'm not even going to go there right now. You've got the Houston Texans heading over to Chicago, where the Bears are 2.5-point favorites right now. If Mooney and Kmet can't get it right this week, chances are they ain't going to get it right the rest of the season. Baltimore Ravens, they're heading to New England, where they are 3.5-point favorites. Ravens secondary, nevermore. Cincinnati versus the New York Jets. Hey, the Jets coming off a huge win last week against the Cleveland Browns. However, they are 4.5-point dogs to the Bengals here. Now, will the Bengals possibly drop a third straight game to Trubisky, to Cooper Rush, to Joe Flacco? Oh, I can't even imagine what's going to happen. Joe Cool there, Joe Burrow, he says, relax. He's trying to channel his inner Aaron Rodgers here. Kansas City, they are 6.5-point favorites as they head to Indianapolis. Chiefs, they are looking to continue to beat a dead horse here in Indianapolis. Let's call it the way it is. But hey, remember last season and the season before, and probably the season before, Jonathan Taylor is a notorious solo starter, and he finishes strong there each and every year. Las Vegas versus Tennessee. You know what? I just can't right now. In a completely unrelated manner, my fandom is a free agent right now. So, hey, if you're a team right now looking for fans, send me some free merchandise, send me some swag. I'm all yours. I can be bought pretty easily. Also, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're heading to Los Angeles to take on the 7.5-point favorite Chargers here. We also have Atlanta versus Seattle. Seattle right now is about a 2-point favorite. It's the Pits that London isn't falling. Get it? Pitts is not doing very good. It's all about Drake London right now. Hey, Pitts, 2 catches, 19 yards in back-to-back weeks. They ain't cutting it, Arthur Smith. San Francisco, Denver, Sunday Night Football. Look, the 49ers, they are preferring the rice-a-roni, the San Francisco treat that Jimmy Garoppolo is cooking compared to whatever that is Russell's got going on there. And Monday Night Football, we've got the Dallas Cowboys, where they're actually underdogs right now to the New York Giants. Look, first versus worst in the NFC East. And it's not who you think it is. It's actually the 2-0 Giants right now who are leading the NFC East. That doesn't even sound right. Now, let's dive into some of the games here this week that I'm excited about. And I put some of these games out to Twitter to see, hey, what are you excited about? To see if you're as excited as I am. And we're starting off with the Lions at the Vikings. Winter, it came early for the Vikings on primetime, so they're going to be looking to rebound in a big, big way this week. Now, I was going to talk about the Los Angeles Rams and the Arizona Cardinals, but you know what? I'm still pretty ticked that the Cardinals beat my Raiders, so I don't even want to talk about that. I mean, basically, Kyler Murray looked like a little toddler who stole an iPhone out of his mom's purse, and he was running around back there, and none of the Raiders could catch him. I mean, you know what? Let's get back to the Lions and let's get back to the Lions here in the Vikings. Now, if you're going to be playing the Lions, you better be bringing your lunch pail. Axel Foley here, he would be proud of his hometown squad right now. Do you want to know what type of team this is? Just look at last week's post-game press conference there where the team started chanting, skip, 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 after Dan Campbell's speech for guard, who was cut during camp, who started last week. You have to love to see that each time. I mean, this team is turning into Dan Campbell. They will bite your kneecaps. They will scratch out your eyes. They will do whatever they got to do to stay in a game. Minnesota, they started the season with a big win over Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, and then they ran into a primetime showdown against the Philadelphia Eagles in what looked to be a possible NFC championship type preview there. Of course, primetime Kirk Cousins, he reared his ugly head along the way, getting picked off 3 times, which easily, I mean very easily, could have been many, many, many more. Now, luckily for Vikings fans, this week, it's not a primetime contest. Now, for Detroit, they are coming into this contest after taking care of business at home last week against the Washington Commanders there in a game in which they got up by 22 points, and then they held on for a 36-27 victory. Now, let's talk about those lines a little bit more. Jared Goff has been efficient, if nothing else. It also helps when you have guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, TJ Hawkinson, DJ Chark, although he did absolutely nothing for your fantasy rosters last week. In 79 snaps, Jared Goff has only been sacked 4 times. That's about 5.4% of the time, and has thrown for 6 touchdowns to only 1 interception to date. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'm going to say it right now, he is this year's Cooper Kupp. Well, at least after 2 weeks. Now, consider him a must start each and every week. St. Brown, he just posted his 8th consecutive 30% plus target share game. Now that, I don't care who you are, that is impressive. Now more to his greatness. Here is a list of all the players in NFL history with 8 plus catches in 8 straight games. Antonio Brown, Michael Thomas, Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's it. That's the list. Over his last 9 contests, St. Brown is second in fantasy points per game with 25.1, trailing only Cooper Kupp. Want to talk running backs? Let's talk about DeAndre Swift. He gave fantasy managers another solid performance last week, posting 16.7 fantasy points while giving his 7th top 10 finish in his last 12 healthy starts. And he wasn't even healthy. That's how good he was. However, he was limited all throughout practices. And like I said, he did this all on just 5 attempts rushing the ball. He only had 2 receptions, and somehow he turned those 7 touches into 87 yards and a touchdown. Hey, we love you, DeAndre Swift. Way to gut it out there. Way to put up some fantasy points for us. Now, keep an eye on Swift and the Lions practice reports. It's not just Swift's participation that we need to focus on. Both Frank Ragnow there and Jonah Johnson, they missed last week's contest. That's 2/3 of that Lions' interior offensive line. Now, for the Minnesota Vikings, after a 9-catch, 184-yard performance in week 1, Justin Jefferson, he followed that up with a 6-catch, 48-yard performance against the Eagles on Monday Night Football. Now, Jefferson, there's no questioning his talent. He is next level. He has averaged over 23 fantasy points per game over his last 10 prior to that week 2 battle there last week against Darius Slay, who picked off Cousins twice and did not surrender a catch to Jefferson when targeting coverage there. Now, per next-gen stats, Jefferson only caught 1 of 5 passes in which Darius Slay was the closest defender. And Cousins, hey, he looked like he was throwing at a gender reveal party. Now, from now on, Kirk Cousins, you need to be in bed before 8 p.m. if you want to be effective. I mean, that's the bottom line right now. As good as Jefferson has been, you still need that good trigger man. And Cousins has certainly been that primetime games withstanding, now tossing a touchdown 32 consecutive contests, while Jefferson has been his first read on 39% of those attempts this year. Aiden Hutchinson for the Lions is coming off a performance last week in which he set a Lions rookie record with 3 sacks in a single game. Detroit now has 6 sacks for the first 2 contests there to start the season after only having 30 all of last season. Not only can the Vikings attack Detroit's corners, but they can also attack this Lions defense on the ground, as Detroit has allowed an average of 31.05 fantasy points per game to running backs for the first 2 games of the season. A couple weeks ago, it was Miles Sanders who had a touchdown and 96 yards, and then Oprah showed up and said, hey, you get a rushing touchdown, you get a rushing touchdown, you get a rushing touchdown, as Jalen Hurts, Boston Scott, and Kenneth Gainwell all got in on that action. Last week, despite being held to just 41 yards on 16 touches, Antonio Gibson, he still managed to find a way into the end zone, so there's a good chance someone's going to find their way in the end zone against the Detroit Lions, so why not? Hey, Dalvin Cook, this is looking pretty good for you. Sure, Dalvin Cook's got a good opportunity to score a touchdown this week. I mean, I just listed that. I just kind of ran that off there. Now, Minnesota's passing game, it wasn't the only thing that struggled. Dalvin Cook was held to 2.8 yards per carry last week. That's not going to get the job done. You know what? That's enough of the Detroit Lions and Minnesota Vikings game. Let's get on to the Buffalo Bills as they head to South Beach to take on the Miami Dolphins. Hey, some like it hot and some sweat when the heat is on. When the Dolphins turn the heat up on this offense, opposing DBs, they are going to sweat a little bit. But when the Bills feel that heat in week 3, will they decide to go on or not? Now, shout out to the Power Station. Also, I'm going to be humming that song the rest of the show here, unless I transition to The Heat Is On. Yeah, there it is. Now, thank you, Glenn Fry. Now, for the record, The Heat Is On was a huge hit for the Beverly Hills Cop soundtrack featuring the aforementioned Axel Foley. Full circle moment there and rolling on the second game of this docket. Both Miami and Buffalo, they enter this game undefeated, and top spot in the AFC East is on the line. Last week on this show, I mentioned that I didn't feel that the Dolphins had fully unleashed this offense here, and it appears now, after last week, hey, they're cooking here. Now, first things first, just stop the Tua Tagovailoa, Matt Flynn comparisons, that nonsense. It's not a thing. It really is not a thing. Ravens fans, just fast forward this next part here. Tagovailoa there, he threw for 469 yards and 6 touchdowns last week. It certainly won't be that easy against this Bills secondary or this defense in general. Now, shout out here to Dane Jackson. As we continue to send prayers to his way there after he suffered a neck injury against the Titans last week, Jackson had full movement there in all of his extremities there, trending in the right direction. Probably not going to be able to play this week, but hey, we're going to send a little love his way no matter what. Now, Buffalo, they should feel pretty much well rested after playing on Monday. Well, did they really play on Monday? There was really no contest against the Titans. Now, they took care of the defending champs there in week 1, 31-10. Then they dethroned King Henry there in the Titans, 41-7. Henry, he may have scored, but with 25 yards on 13 carries, I'm going to call that a win for this Bills defense. The Titans, they were waving that white flag there before the fourth quarter even started, prompting the Bills to do the same, ending Allen's day with just 317 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. Yeah, it could have been a lot worse, and fantasy managers are kind of probably hoping he would have played at least one more quarter there. Now, only 5 players in Super Bowl era here have had at least 3 career games with 140-plus receptions and 3 receiving touchdowns. 3 of them are in the Hall of Fame. Jerry Rice, he did it 7 times. Randy Moss, 4 times. Marvin Harrison, 3 times. The other 2 are in this game. Stephon Diggs, 3 times, including week number 2, and Tyreek Hill. Now, the Rice and Hill, they've got a little bit more history on their side here, as they are only 2 players with 4 career games with 10-plus receptions and 150-plus receiving yards to go along with 2 touchdowns. Now for Miami, last week, Waddle and Hill, they ranked 2nd and 5th in air yards, 180 for Waddle, 130 for Hill, while finishing the day with over 360 combined receiving yards. Who will the Bills decide to put their focus on here this week? Historically, against the Chiefs at least, it has been hit or miss for the Bills. In the 2020 regular season, Buffalo held Tyreek Hill to 3 catches for 20 yards, but then in the playoffs, Hill got his revenge, torching that Bills secondary for 172 yards and 9 catches. Then we move along to 2021. Buffalo again contained Hill to the tune of 63 yards on 7 receptions before he did them dirty again in the playoffs, racking up 150 receiving yards on 11 receptions. Per NFL research, the Dolphins were the first team in NFL history, yes, the first team in NFL history with a player recording 400-plus passing yards and 5 touchdowns, Tua, along with 2 teammates recording 170-plus receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Yeah, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle in the same game. How are the Bills going to slow this down? We'll see. Now, speaking of Tagovailoa here, did you know he is now 8-1 against Super Bowl winning coaches? That's an 889 winning percentage. So maybe we should start showing Tua a little bit of love. Hey, he gets plenty of love whenever I'm talking about him. If you were trying to figure out who's going to do what in this backfield, the best I can tell you is it's going to be game script dependent with Mostert and Chase Edmonds there. Mostert, as long as he remains healthy, he's going to get a majority of the carries, while Edmonds, he's going to be getting most of the receiving work. Luckily for the Bills, this is not a playoff game, so Tyreek Hill is probably not going to pop off this week, but they still have to deal with Jalen Waddle, who accounted for 38% of Miami's targets and 50% of the Dolphins' air yards in week 2. If Waddle and Hill get the ball in their hands, hey, they are capable of scoring from anywhere and everywhere on the field, as they're number 1 and 2 after the catch. Now for the Bills, perhaps the best way to keep this Dolphins offense's check is by keeping them off the field altogether. Buffalo, thanks in large part to Von Miller, has done an excellent job at pressuring quarterbacks without bringing the blitz. Something that Tua has actually handled quite nicely. If they can pressure this offense and drop into coverage, they put themselves in a much better position defensively. Josh Allen has leveled up once again. His 61.2 fantasy points in the first 2 weeks of the season are the 10th most in the Super Bowl era per Graham Barfield stat pack over at fantasypoints.com. Hey, go get some. Now, Allen also ranks first in depth adjusted completion rate, checking in at 87.6%. I'm told that's pretty darn good. If you like matchups inside the matchups as I do, first you have to go over and check out Wes Huber's advanced matchup piece there on Fantasy Points. Then grab your popcorn and get ready for Stephon Diggs for Xavier Howard. This is going to be a great one. Although, hey, Bateman last week there for the Baltimore Ravens, he got the best of Howard on a couple occasions, including a nice release on that 50-yard touchdown on that slant. We know Diggs is going to do what he does best. After all, he did put up 148 yards on 12 receptions against the Titans in just 3 quarters of work. Not bad. Diggs is the first player since Steve Smith back in 2007 to produce 250 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns in the team's first 2 games of the season. In 2007, if you want to take this trip back down memory lane with me, Steve Smith, he would go on to win the Triple Crown. It also helps when your quarterback and your wide receiver combine for 140 fantasy points in the first 2 games of the season, which is an all-time high for fantasy quarterback wide receiver duo in 2 contests. Buffalo is certainly going to be happy to get Gabriel Davis back. He basically said, there's no way I'm missing this week's game. Now, Davis and Diggs, they complement each other very well, and both are better when the other one is in the lineup. I'm not sure if Miami has a corner that's going to be able to match up with Davis's side and physicality in this one. If you like pass catchers, this game is for you. We've got Tua and Allen. We've got Waddle and Hill versus Diggs and Davis. The heat won't just be on the street in this one. It will be on the AFC East and on South Beach. I promise you that much. Next, let's keep it down in Florida here. Let's talk about the visiting Green Bay Packers as they head into Tampa Bay to take on Tom Brady and the 2.5-point favorite Buccaneers here. Hey, Rodgers versus Brady is like Magic versus Larry. Ali versus Frazier. Maybe even this generation's Manning versus Brady, as Brady versus Rodgers takes center stage here. We have a combined 7 NFL MVPs on the field in Tampa Bay, with Aaron Rodgers contributing 4 of them after taking back-to-back MVP seasons here, squaring off with Tom Brady and those Bucs. Both quarterbacks, they have been playing behind banged-up offensive lines, and neither quarterback seems to be getting any help recently, as Rodgers has been dealing with some aging veterans and a pair of rookies prior to the second coming of Jerry Rice there last week, returning the lineup. Yes, I'm being sarcastic, Alan Lazard. While Brady has been dealing with a revolving door of injuries and suspensions to his receiving core, last week, the Bucs were without Chris Godwin and Julio Jones. And this week, it looks like obviously Chris Godwin's going to be out again. But Mike Evans, he was suspended due to a brouhaha with Marshawn Lattimore and the Saints. Now, let's talk Packers here for a second. Did the refs help Rodgers and the Packers last week? Did Justin Fields break the goal line? You know what? I'll leave that for another day. Has anyone seen, though? This is the question that's on my mind. Has anyone seen Aaron Rodgers and CM Punk in the same room? I demand answers. Now, Rodgers hasn't been his usual MVP self here, whether it's his O-line, whether it's his receivers, pain medication, or hallucinogens. Okay, we know he can play on medication, so it can't be that. Aaron Rodgers has 429 yards, 2 touchdowns in 2 games, and that's not good. And now he gets a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team who has a leading 22 sacks, thanks to Devin White, who has got 3 of them. Shaq Barrett has a pair. Levante David, Vita Vea, Antoine Winfield, Anthony Nelson. These guys all have at least one as well. I'm still trying to figure out that whole tea celebration that Alan Lazard busted out last week, but it was quite apparent that Aaron Rodgers had previously partaken in something very similar. Now, looking at the Packers' route distribution per player, it was Alan Lazard who led the way with 26, followed by Aaron Jones' 18, Sammy Watkins' 18, A.J. Dillon 15, and Robert Tonyan 14. Rookies Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson had 13 and 7, respectively. I guess. Now, if Green Bay continues to trot out both Dillon and Jones on the field at the same time, they are going to give defensive coordinators fits. We know that both backs are more than capable of hurting defenses. Aaron Jones is averaging 9.1 yards per carry thus far and has 181 rushing yards to go along with 65 receiving yards there on those 6 receptions, doing most of the damage last week, having an even lower snap share, 59%, than he previously had the week before, which was 61%. Brady is in desperate need of a bounce-back week this week. In 2 contests so far this season, he has 2 touchdowns and a 3.3% touchdown rate, which has him literally tied with Jacoby Brissett heading into week number 3. That's 23rd. That's behind Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith, Marcus Mariota. Currently, right now, the broken Microsoft tablet to touchdown ratio is actually pretty close in Tampa Bay. Now, someone has to catch the ball this week. I'm not sure who's going to be available. We just talked about Chris Godwin not being available. Mike Evans, he's not going to be available. Who else is there? I mean, we are literally talking about the leading receiver in this game could be Cole Beasley, who could just mess around, coming off the streets, and be Brady's top target this week. Are we sure that Gronk is retired right now? Like literally, really, are we sure of this? You have to imagine a phone call or two have been placed so far this week, sometime along the way. Now, Leonard Fournette has already promised fantasy managers touchdowns are coming. And hey, we love ourselves some tutties. Now, look, it was on Twitter, so it has to be true. Everything on Twitter is true. It's going to come to fruition here. We are all behind Leonard Fournette this week. We know that Fournette is the bell cow there in Tampa Bay. Again, week 2, he dominated the backfield snaps with 87% of them. Green Bay, they will need to fix this run defense after surrendering 126 yards to the Vikings on 28 carries in week number 1, and then 160 to the duo of David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert on just 19 attempts. That's not good. Now let's move on to another great game here right now. Let's move on to a revenge game. We have Philadelphia at Washington right now, where the Eagles are 3.5-point favorites here. This is a Carson Wentz revenge game. Carson Wentz has basically said on Wednesday that Eagles fans, we know that they travel well, but he hopes that Washington will dominate in the stands. I just hope that these stands won't fall apart like they did last time Jalen Hurts and the Eagles were in town. Now, Philadelphia, they selected Carson Wentz second overall all the way back in 2016. Yeah, holy crow, 2016. Man, we are getting old right now. There's no other way around this. Hey, there were some good times, like an MVP caliber type season there in 2017 where Wentz led the Eagles to an 11-2 record before tearing his ACL. Then Nick Foles, he came in there and led these wild underdogs to a Super Bowl championship. After that, things just were never the same. Philadelphia traded Wentz to Indianapolis in March of 2021. You ever play kick the can as a kid? Maybe I'm starting to really date myself now, but Carson Wentz, he kind of feels like he's that can. Both Philadelphia and Indianapolis, they basically just kicked Wentz, and now Washington realizes how important that can is to the actual game itself. Wentz has produced a much better stat line than Matt Ryan has through Washington's first 2 contests. Things have worked out pretty good for the Eagles. Eventually, as they head to Washington, they are being led by Jalen Hurts, who is perhaps the best quarterback in the National Football League after 2 weeks, after taking care of both the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings. For Philadelphia, off the get-go, again, last November, I was telling people to relax when it came to Jalen Hurts. I told everyone this is your quarterback of the future, and not everybody listened, and not even everyone's listening now. Fun fact, Taylor Swift basically wrote a song for Jalen Hurts a couple years ago, starting with, haters going to hate, while Jalen Hurts is going to play, and baby, I'm going to shake. Needless to say, after the start that Hurts has gotten off to in 2022, he has taken all that hate and just shaken it off. Now, Monday night, Hurts had 333 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. The last time an Eagles quarterback did that, Michael Vick, way back in November of 2010. Hurts is the first player. Listen closely. I'm going to speak slowly, which is hard for me to do sometimes. Hurts is the first player in NFL history to throw for 300-plus yards, rush for 2 touchdowns, and complete 80% of his passes. Now, pick your poison with this Eagles offense. Hurts has been able to beat teams with both his legs and his arms, and he's got a little bit of help with his backfield buddies there. Philadelphia, they rank first in yards per game with 162.9 and rushing yards 31 since 2021. Washington is going to need Daron Major Payne to play a much bigger role this week as he continues to increase that pass rush win percentage. Payne increased that percentage from 13.2% in week number 1 to 18% here in week number 2, which was one of the best marks among defensive linemen. Too bad the rest of the Commanders' defense is allowing about 29 points per game. Outside of Hurts, we saw what Devontae Smith can do when he gets more involved in this offense. Part of that is the correct usage from a week ago. The other part is Minnesota used a lot of cover 3 and cover 4, which historically has given A.J. Brown a little bit of difficulty there. This week, ask what Brown can do for you, because Washington uses more cover 2 and more cover 6 looks, which is something that A.J. Brown is actually good at, which he's good at a lot of things, but he's really good when it comes to that kind of coverage. A.J. Brown has been Jalen Hurts' first read on 42% of his attempts so far this season, which is the second highest rate in the National Football League, trailing only Cooper Kupp, who has been that first read target 46% of the time for Matthew Stafford, and that's per fantasy points data. Now, finally, let's talk about the Washington Commanders. Your Commanders fans, are you enjoying the full Carson Wentz experience yet? Because you haven't quite got it yet, but you've seen glimpses of it. Wentz, he can look like a top-tier type quarterback one moment, and then next he can have you throwing things at the television. So far, he's been pretty good outside of a few head-scratching moments there. But, hey, that's what you've come to expect with him. Carson Wentz, he may say all the politically correct things leading up to this contest, but you know he wants to stick it to the Eagles here after they had tossed him to the side like garbage. Let's hope that Wentz is on the top of his game and not looking like a primetime Kirk Cousins here. Wentz enters this contest with a league-high 7 touchdowns, the second most passing yards, 650, as well as a rating of 100.3. Those 7 touchdowns are the most from a quarterback through 2 games in Washington history. Move over Mark Rippon. Move over Joe Theismann. There's a new top dog in the house, and it's Carson Wentz. One advantage of being bounced around the way Carson Wentz has been is you become the first player since QB starts were kind of tracked back in 1950 to have 300-plus passing yards, 3+ touchdowns in each of his first 2 starts with his new team. That's per NFL research. Of note, Washington placed Chase Roulier there on the injured reserve list, which is a significant blow to their interior line. I don't think I've witnessed a better performance from a defensive back than what I saw from Darius Slay against Justin Jefferson on Monday Night Football. So if you're thinking about starting Terry McLaurin, I would think that you might want to temper your expectations. That said, hey, I think that Curtis Samuel and Jahan Dotson could receive an additional workload as long as the Washington line can protect Wentz. Last week, it was the rookie Dotson who led the Commanders receiver group in snaps, seeing 73 of them and being targeted 4 times on 53 routes. Meanwhile, Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel had a better target share, each of them seeing at least 7 targets on 46 routes on 66 snaps. I joked at the start of the season there that Dotson would eventually replace Terry McLaurin as the top option in this offense, but I didn't think that Curtis Samuel would jump both of them. But here we are. Curtis Samuel is now a weekly starter for your fantasy squads. You heard it first. I will say it. I got no problem saying it. Maybe it's bold, maybe it's not, but I'm all about that life. Last week, he called in 7 passes for 78 yards as well as a touchdown while having an 87% route participation rate there and 20.9% of that target share. What makes him such a strong play this week is that 70% of his routes come out of the slot, a place in which he can avoid Darius Slay, a place in which he can avoid James Bradbury. So expect Washington to continue to run plenty of wide receiver routes. They've done this 82% of the time, which is the 3rd most behind just the Rams and the Bengals. When all is said and done, I hope that Carson Wentz plays well enough to justify why some fantasy point staffers still have their signed poster of Carson Wentz in their bedrooms. Now tell me, what games and what headlines have you excited for week number 3? Because I want to hear from you. Get in the comments, drop them in there. Hey, if you have starts and sits questions, drop them in there. I'm going to make sure I can catch up on there and talk a little shop with you. And use promo code HYPE22 to get 10% off that subscription over at fantasypoints.com today. We have all kinds of packages that may suit whatever your needs may be. And if you like free, hey, I love myself free. Anything free is worth saving up for. We've got all kinds of free YouTube shows here on Fantasy Points, including Monday Grades with Wes Huber. Those come on at 9 a.m. Eastern. Tuesday, Plugged In DFS Review. Scott Barrett and Jordan Tolan, they come at you at 2 p.m. Eastern. Wednesdays is the midweek mailbag there with Nick Scripp. And, of course, we've got the daily lineup with Joe Dolan. Get your cup of Joe every morning, every Tuesday through Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern. And you know what? Fantasy Points Nation, let's ride.